Welcome to Lit Happens, Unpacking Senior English. I'm Adriel.
And I'm Belle.
We're experienced English teachers dedicated to supporting both new and experienced educators in a world in which we are often time poor, to empower our students to excel in their English studies.
If you're an English teacher, like us, navigating this curriculum, then this podcast is designed with you in mind. And our mission really is to break down the complexities by unpacking English nationally.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 41 of Lit Happens. Today's podcast is all about yearly English exams, skills, content, and ideas. Hi, Adriel. How are you? Welcome to term 4 of this year's school year. Yeah, how are you feeling?
Term 4. Yeah, good. Ready for the run home. Ready for the HSC exams, which will be sitting, this Thursday coming through. So, yeah, good for the kids. It'll be nice to get another cohort over the line and talk more English things.
Yeah, beautiful. All right, so as I said to everybody, we are doing English exams because we know that in term 4 we're hitting our last assessment, and it's a really kind of common English assessment to wrap up with. It's not the only style of assessment to wrap up with, but one that certainly Adriel and I have had a lot of experience with. So that might lead us into our lit or quit question for the day, Adriel. So lit or quit, doing a yearly examination for all grades. Is that lit or is it a quit?
I think it's lit. I think examinations are important for all kids. I think in the age of AI now, it's even more so important and important for kids to be sitting some sort of exam. But we know this when speaking, over the last year or so in our pod. Exam craft is something that kids need to be used to from early years. And I feel like if we aren't doing these at the end of the year for each respective year group, we're not setting them up well for the latter years when in year 11 they'll sit their prelim, and year 12 obviously the big HSC examination and their trials. So I think it definitely is lit. I also think, as I sort of touched on there, with the age of artificial intelligence and the hand-in tasks becoming more and more difficult to police for kids, for teachers, I honestly think that examinations are probably the only sort of way around that, and that's a good precursor for kids in life. We don't always get to do things that we want, which for most people will be, let's take something home and do it. We know this very clearly. If you are put in an exam situation, it's just about testing where you're at with certain skills, and I think it's a great sort of leveler all up. That's me personally, old school thinking. People may beg to differ, but yeah, I think they're lit.
Yeah, look, I agree with you. I think on both fronts, I think some people might disagree for sure, but I like them. I think they're very flexible, adaptable, because it can be just straight skills based. You can use it as an opportunity to get students to rehash some of the texts and skills that they've covered across the year. I even like it. I know that some people might not do a whole yearly style in the whole exam for maybe year 7 and 8, but you could very much do it like topic test style, where it's still in like an exam and skills format, and then maybe it's just what you're assessing them on is slightly more specific to what they did at the end of or middle to end of term 3 and start of term 4. I think it's crucial once they're in year 9 and 10. So it starts putting them like the onus on them to really take control of that learning, because I know from my understanding in maybe my school context is that other subject areas do topic tests and exams quite often. And in English, we, like to do a lot of hand-in. As you said, that's changing now due to AI. But I think it's so valuable that we do that with our guys too, because they tend to have this thinking of it's not really an exam-based subject, or what's that phrase? You can't really study for English. I know that frustrates to no end, because you absolutely can. It's maybe a slightly different way of studying, but I think when you do integrate like exams, it gets them out of that mindset and gets them actually thinking about, how do I go home and revise and work on my skills and content leading forward. So that's what we're going to take you through today, guys. What yearly English exams might look like for the year groups, how they're structured and styled, what concepts and skills you might like to cover, and just how can we prepare the students for the exam and offer some tips and takeaways for the teachers. So let's get into it, Adrielle, shall we?
Yeah, sounds
All
good.
right. So the first question that we want to begin with, Adrielle, for this episode is why do we or should we do a yearly exam for English for all of the year groups? Why do
Mm,
we even
mm.
have them?
I sort of touched on this previously. I think we're sort of establishing good skills for the students in early
Yeah.
years, and you sort of made reference to this. Even if you don't have kids in the cohort, let's say for example year 7 and 8 cohorts, sitting in the hall for a whole yearly exam or school hall or whatever it may be that you have your larger exams in your respective settings. I think getting kids to understand how exams. I think over the years, yeah, I know over my teaching career, for some reason, there's been this taboo or this moving away from exams and transitioning towards in-class assessment tasks. You and
Mhm.
I were both part of the last cohort of people that would have done or sat the school certificate examination
Yes.
back in the day. And I don't know, some of the rumors that we used to have with the school certificate was like, you don't pass the school certificate, you're not moving on to 11 or 12.
Mm.
And gone are those days now, for better or for worse. I am part of the ladder crew there. I think it's just, meant that teachers have lost an element of power as well in the classroom.
Mm.
In examinations, but we won't go down that little rabbit hole there. But why are English exams important for all year groups? Well, you're testing the capabilities of students in an environment that they will face when they're in year 11 and 12. And again, let's be honest, that's the goal for people in high school. Like the HSC, if we go down the track to 11, year 12, uh, is not a test of your overall knowledge. It's how well you perform under pressure. Because let's be honest,
Yeah.
in two papers, one respectively being, an hour and a half, the other 2 hours, you're not going to get the most of everyone's, knowledge. But we're looking at how kids can actually adapt, how they can write, how they can critically look at. Like these skills, this is what necessitates the English subject for us. And if
Yeah.
we develop skills nice and early, um, for our junior cohorts in stage 4 and stage 5, respectively, moving into stage 6, I think we set the tone for a good sort of litmus test to see where your whole year group is. So, you're testing the standard. It's a nice sort of way in which all students have the same piece of paper in front of them. They're in the same pressure cooker environment, and I think it just evens the playing field there, for everybody. And
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's important in testing those skills. Like we sort of just mentioned, it's not a test of how well you can recall things in English. It's a test of how well you have looked at this or learnt the skills, and then can respectively apply them in that exam at the end of the year. So, for example, in year 7, if you're learning the basic grammar and punctuation, if you're looking at creative writing, like the beginnings of creative writing, or looking at persuasive text, the simple things, setting the foundation, well, obviously your
Yeah.
exam is going to test those skills that students have learnt through the year, and it's a good test. Like I think personally for myself, if I was back in school and I know that I haven't learnt the prerequisite skills in year 7 and 8, well, year 9 and 10 is going to mean we're going to have to catch up quite a bit, and this is what kids find, moving forward. So
It's true.
yeah,
I agree. It's true. I agree. I think the sooner you start the tests, and look, they don't have to be difficult tests. Like you and I have created tests for junior years that are very accessible, very like easy entry level. It's just about, I think, demystifying that aspect of the English test,
mm,
sorry, because I think the more that I know, I feel like, yeah, when you mentioned before that move away from exams, but then I felt like when if they just do an exam once they only when they get to year 10, you sort of all this
yeah,
have this built up hype and tension Whereas if you're doing topic tests and things like that from year 7, there isn't that same anxiety when they're doing their yearly exam in year 10 and in prelim, because they get the gist of how it works and what you've got to do. So
Yeah.
I can see one camp is saying, but not everybody does good in exams. So, therefore we try and do more take home. But the con to that is students are not practicing these exam skills slowly over time to
Mm,
minimize that anxiety. And
mm,
ultimately, unless the HSC becomes a take home test, we have
yeah.
to integrate that. And I think the earlier and the more simpler, the better. We don't want to be shocking our students when they get to year 10 and having to play catch up all the
Yeah.
years that they might have been able to work on the skills. And I know that you're going to offer a lot of great suggestions later as to how
Mm.
we might incorporate and differentiate that. But I think we should move on
I
to
think
now. Yeah,
I
go
think
on.
just one more thing to add there. I was speaking actually today with my hand surgeon. Some of you may have realized in some of the episodes I've had like little splints on my hands. And he's got a son that's sitting his HSC this year, for example. We're just
Mm.
talking, and he's at Sydney Grammar. And it's funny. It was less about my hands and more about education, or talking about as you do in some of these specialist meetings. If any kids listening, become a specialist, you'll earn a lot of money. That's for sure. You just need to know your craft and do really well. But that's a side note there. Um, but speaking with him about Sydney Grammar and sort of some of those elite schools, and we know Sydney Grammar is always performing um, at an elite level. They start when they're young. You can sort of see. So speaking with him, he said, every term they'd be sitting like an exam of some sort, even in English, from year 7 onwards, in all of their subjects, and you see the fruits of that sort of labor when they do come to their HSC results. Because again, at the end of the day, the HSC is not a take-home examination. You're sitting in an exam room. You're doing 6 exams or 5 exams respectively, or more. You're doing extension subjects, um, and it's about how well you can have those skills that you build in over time. That analogy that we generally use. If you go to a gym again and you put 200 kilos on the bar, you're going to get crushed by the weight of that examination. So I think it is important for us to start this nice and early. And if elite schools are doing this, um, I think it'd be good for all teachers to take this on board.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I will get into question 2 then. So, what does a yearly exam look like in terms of its structure and style? So, what are we actually doing within a yearly English exam?
Look, an exam could vary depending on whatever your unit um, sort of have covered through the year. So I think some of the big things that I will say for what an exam should look like, if we start with our junior grades, stage 4, we know that English and marking English is very difficult. I'm going to say to all
Mm-hmm.
teachers, keep it simple for yourself. I know for us, and for our junior grades, year 7 and 8, we generally have like a multiple choice section because we'd look at our
Yes.
colleagues in mathematics or science who, rip through marking, and we're sitting there reading 7 or 8 different short answer
Mm-hmm.
responses. Like, well, no, you can actually have short answers, or you can actually have multiple choice sections for your junior grades. It's also a good test for like NAPLAN and stuff like that, which,
Yeah.
um, again, people who are in either camp there, it's still a precursor. We still have to set it in our schools. And I think, having some sort of short answer section where you can mark it very quickly is going to make your life a lot easier as a teacher. So 10 or so multiple choice questions. I generally split it into 3 for a stage 4 exam, maybe then do about 2, maybe maximum of 3 short answer questions.
Mm-hmm.
And you would differentiate the questions as well accordingly. So if we take a step back into our multiple choice section, you want to make most of that accessible to the students. That will be for kids who can at least attempt the exam, that gives them some sort of sense of achievement. And even,
Yes.
getting kids to go into those examinations, you'll be like, hey guys, have a go. It's easy if you're
Mm.
supervising, have a go. It's not like you have to think of things for multiple choice, really. color in a circle, and you may get an opportunity to get a mark. You know, and then you might go into, like I said, your short answer sections. I like to have 2, maybe 5 mark questions, an easy or more accessible
Yeah.
question where they might identify something and explain it. And then this will be to do with like your short text as well. So they might read like an extract. They might have to identify, I don't know, 2 techniques and explain their use, or 2 techniques with quotes, and that's their 4 to 5 marks there. And then the second question in this section can be something along the lines of a little bit more an analytical base, where they really have to explain something or analyze something in the short extract that they've read. And
Mm-hmm.
this is your differentiating question there. So now we're starting to differentiate the exam now from the low to middle sort of uh, participants in our cohorts. And then you get into the final section, which could be, I mean, for your junior school, it could be some form of speech. It could be, creative writing task. I know in year 7 we used to do creative writing stories. They'd be easy to mark, nice to read. And then in year 8, you might do like a persuasive text. Like instead of doing an essay, you might do something like
Mm-hmm.
a speech, which sets the
Mm-hmm.
tone. And then when you go into year 9 and 10, I would still keep like a similar structure. You just might add a few marks to the respective sections. So instead of having it out of 30, you could have it out of 40. Again, depending on how your school sort of does it. But having that 3-way split, short answers, sorry, not short answers, maybe multiple choice, some short answers, and then some longer response questions in year 9.
Mm.
And then year 10, you can actually probably change it a little bit as it is their Rosa. Instead of having multiple choice, I know it becomes a little bit more difficult to mark, but you want to start to prep them for that jump into stage 6. You might start molding your examinations like a mini prelim exam. So it
Yes.
might be, one short answer section, one creative, and then one persuasive. I would suggest having a style and structure like that, and then obviously your prelims and your HSC exams. We've spoken in depth about these in previous episodes, so I won't talk too much about that. You don't really need to plan for stage 6 too much there, but yeah, that's how I would look at style and structure in my junior grades.
Yeah, I think that's really good. And I like your idea of you can kind of structure it accordingly to that cohort and what year they are. And, depending on how easy or difficult you want to make it, depending on sometimes you have cohorts that are stronger than others or might need more
Mm,
simplified things. So, and I think that the great thing too is I think we think we have to have full on like 2-page responses, and like really you could do just an atmospheric opening of a story, or you could do
yeah.
the introduction to a persuasive response. There's so many ways in where you can differentiate and simplify the content of the exam while still getting them to engage with some exam skills. So I think you've offered a really nice overview and some great tips on transitioning from a stage 4 yearly exam to more of a stage 5 one. So
Mhm.
that's great. Maybe we should move into question 3 because you kind of started touching on this. So it's a nice transition. But looking at now what specific English concepts or exam skills we might be covering within some examples of what might go in those sections.
Yeah, cool, cool. Well, we sort of covered this in terms of the way you'd structure your exam a little bit, but
Yes.
remember the purpose of an
Yes.
exam is to sort of cover the skills that you have taught your kids in an English exam. Sorry, the skills that you have taught the kids through the entirety of the school year. So, depending on what your programs look like for the respective stages, you should be looking at the key skills. Like, what do you want to test kids? Like, what are the important things that will lead them into that next year? So, for example, like we were just saying before, you might have key skills like reading and viewing. That might be your short answer, multiple choice section. Writing and responding. Again, responding to unseen texts, short answer questions there. And then we
Mm-hmm.
start to move into some of the more longer response type skills where, they're composing creative texts or composing critical thinking texts, which are your persuasive sort of writing responses there, where they have to think critically about an idea.
Mm-hmm.
These are like those main skills. And again, it just all depends on the way you guys are programmed. And this is why
Yes.
it's so important to have the collaborative sort of design when you are looking at programming, and then really considering the way in which you are structuring your assessments through the year as well. So even like through the year, for example, in your programs, you might have mini topic tests that mimic one of the sections in your yearly exam.
That's a
So
good
when
idea.
the kids do come to their yearly examinations, it's nothing that's so daunting for them. They sort of have an idea. I know personally, like a lot of kids will come out of an exam saying, "Oh, we never learnt that," or "We didn't do this," or X, Y, and Z. It's not that you haven't taught it or you haven't gone over it in the term. It's just because the pressure of the exam has gotten to them. And when you take a step back, or even when they take a step back and they go back and like, "Oh, actually, we did go through this in week 6 of term 2," you know.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
find like one of the things in junior grades as well is we will often just base the exam on whatever the kids have learnt in term 3. I think it's important to actually have a more holistic approach to it. So that's where those mini sort of topic tests through the year become very important, but it all does fall down into your programming, you know? So what
Yeah. I
concepts are
agree.
you respectively programming for a stage, and what skills do you want those kids to have when they transition to that next grade? So year 7 for us, for example, I know when we were teaching at our school together, in year 7 we used to have a very big focus on creative skills in year 7. Um, and then they'd move into year 8 where we'd start to look at persuasive skills.
Yes.
And then year 9, you'd start to look at some of the critical thinking. And then, combining that persuasive and creative element. And then obviously in year 10, you're combining all of them together. So it was a nice sort of progression there in terms of the concepts. Now, I'm not
Mm-hmm.
referencing some of the explicit English concepts that will be for you guys to do in your own
Yes.
time. And we might do an episode
Yeah.
on these English concepts later
I
on.
think we
But
definitely.
yeah, but again, it's up to you in your personal environments. I mean, your head teachers, respectively, or your senior executive and executive group may have a special way in which you look at exams. Some of you may say, but my executive groups um, limit us to like one exam a year. Well, make that exam count then.
Yeah.
That's the way I would sort of look at it. Um, or call me up and I'll come and have a chat with them. I don't know. Um,
Uh, no, I love your idea of strategizing depending on what you've done across the years so that, like when we've programmed with the juniors, we've tried to make sure across a stage we've covered all these different textual concepts quite evenly. And so then when it goes into the exam, you might decide, oh, section 1 is going to hit a little bit more specifically on these textual concepts. And section 2 might be using creative writing skills to look at these textual concepts and so forth. So
mm,
I really love the idea that you can actually from the beginning when you're programming for the whole year, if you backward map from that kind of final exam, or you kind of make sure how it all ties in, and it's going to be a really nice holistic way to assess what they've learned across their year as opposed to
yeah.
just within that one term, like you said. So I think that's a fabulous strategy for teachers for sure. For sure. And now you've got those new NESA outcomes. So you
Mm,
obviously we all need to make sure that we're assessing those specific outcomes as well. All right. Well then,
yeah.
so if that's teachers kind of planning for a yearly exam, how might we actually approach preparing students for that within this classroom in the lead up to the exam? So how could
Mm,
we prepare
mm,
them to engage more effectively with an English exam?
yeah. I think the important thing here is, again, to break that myth that you actually do have to study for English exams, and the study requires you guys to build on the skills that you have learned through the entirety of the term. So, really focusing on the skills. Okay, so you're saying you don't have to study? Well, let's look at what an analysis looks like. So, how are you going to
Yeah.
identify and analyze ideas in a text?
Yeah, or just identify techniques often is a big one.
Yeah,
They just don't bother to memorize their language forms and features.
yeah, yeah. And I think that's very important for the kids, for focusing on those ideas, those techniques. It's how do they apply them and use them. So in their study time, instead of just trying to memorize it, which is one component of it, you're memorizing, but then you're applying. So in their study time, that's what they should be doing. I know we have this difficulty with some of our senior kids, for example. It's like, well, they'll memorize everything. Then it comes to an exam where you have to apply those skills that they've memorized or the content that they've memorized, and it's like it falls down like a sack of potatoes,
Yes.
and it becomes mashed potato in their face. That they're
Yeah.
just like, what's going on here? So I think it's very important. I also think in the preparation time is you really have to emphasize the timed nature of examinations.
Yes.
So put the pressure on. How well, like kids can spend 3 hours and you may get to the right answers eventually, but if you're not doing it under time conditions in an exam, you'll miss half your exam. So really emphasizing that nice and early, giving every single question a go, you know, practicing those skills. I know when I was younger, my parents used to always say to me, like, oh, for example, for creative writing, um, they'd be like, all right, read a novel. And then they're not like my parents aren't in the English background or teaching literature or anything like that. Just hard workers. But what they used to say was, read something and then just summarize it. Maybe look at main ideas.
Yeah.
I wish I paid closer attention to that at times. But those little things are important. You know what I'm
Like your
saying?
super six strategies and stuff.
Oh, 100%. 100%.
Yeah, it's a great idea.
Any of those strategies, reading strategies, your Super Six reading and writing strategy, like those are so, so important. So
Fundamentals.
I think, yeah, getting the kids those fundamentals, comprehension. Kids don't know full stops or capital letters, so and they're expect to know, things about the world, or oh, but I'm very smart. I don't need to study about this. Yet you see their first sentence in it lacks any form of punctuation or grammar, and you're just like, well, really?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm finding
Yeah.
this with some of my year 12 kids,
Yeah.
in the past
Yeah.
years, where you look at their writing and you're saying, you are in either standard or advanced English, and you have so many inconsistencies in your expression. Um, so these are the things that we want to start to develop. I think also one of the other big things is adaptability. So kids can have pre-prepared things, but it's about adapting what they have pre-prepared. Having a
Mhm.
foundation, having some sort of base which they can
Mhm.
and go on and mold into an exam. We know that that is one of the biggest ways in which kids will save time. We know that that is what most successful students will be doing. So don't try and recreate the wheel. Don't try and be a hero and say, hey, if I'm a student here, hey, like I can go in and just do everything off the cuff. No, you can't. Like,
No.
no, your teachers will struggle. Your teachers will struggle with that same sort of thing.
Yes.
We prepare, we plan. Same thing applies. You need to prepare and you need to plan how you're going to approach things and have
Yeah.
notes ready to go.
Yeah. I know some schools will do like a formative task in preparation before an exam. And so it
Mm,
could be like an activity sheet that covers some of the types of skills that the kids will
mm,
see in the exam, and kind of everyone will get one and everyone will get a certain period to do it. And it's very like fair and even that way. And it's also quite controlled, because I know
yeah.
how many times have, even the schools that we've worked at, have we had conversations over, or do we even let the other teachers see the exam, or
Mm,
should it just be
mm,
the teacher who makes the exam? And making sure that, even because I know a lot of us will reuse stuff from previous
yeah.
exams and put it together, that's a very common and effective
Mm,
strategy. And so there's always sometimes a part of me that's like, what if I show a past paper and that happens to accidentally be in there
yeah.
again? Like, do you know what I mean? Like, it's so I think if there's like one person in control, and here is the practice
Mm,
activity, and then everyone can kind of have a go without you getting accidentally caught out, or have
yeah.
possibly parents going, our children were not prepared and whatnot. I think there's so many ways we can engage the kids, even if we need to support them before we hit an
Mm,
exam. But I like that you're sort of looking at all the different bases and like, well, these are the various skills. So what's a little activity that we can do to just
yeah.
preempt the kids a little bit, particularly that first exam? I feel like after that, they have more of a understanding of roughly what it's going to be like. But that very first
Yeah.
one, you might need to do a bit more practice and prep around that. Hey.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. And look, if there's anyone from NESA listening, I also think like holding kids accountable with the examinations is important as well. How many times have we gone into an examination room and you just see a kid put their head on the desk after attempting the first question, or not even
Yeah.
attempting the question? You're just like,
Yeah.
what sort of precedent are we setting for our students? So I understand that as well for teachers, because you'll put a lot of effort and time in, and then you rock up to
Yes.
that examination, you see that, and you just get frustrated. I'm going to give you two things. First thing is, well, that student's made that choice, and that means your marking load is one paper easier. Um, but second of all, like, at the end of the day, you don't want to um, become lazy with your craft. You guys are fantastic teachers. I can fall victim to this as well, where you sort of think, well, what's the point? Why do this? But that question can then be said about anything, like, what's the point? What's the point? What's the point? And if we continue to say that, you start to fall down a rabbit hole and you will not enjoy your teaching as much. So just remain positive, find why you do things. And we know, like, kids that do actually take the exam seriously, they're the ones that you're going to be nurturing and fostering when it comes to the senior years, when they
Yeah.
when they really do care.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
could be a diagnostic tool there.
Yeah, you're right, because I think especially with the head down, sometimes that can be also like a bit of a protection mechanism, and
Mhm.
so I think it is good. I think that's the other good thing about exams. It gives you a sense of where a student might be at or where they might be falling behind. Like, I know I had a particular student where in the class they were fine with talking and back and forth, they could create work, but when they were left on their own, their learning
Mm,
difficulty was really emphasized in a way that it was not as noticeable before that.
mm,
So as difficult as it can be, and might produce some anxiety for students, it's also really great, from my perspective, eye opener for teachers to see
yeah,
what a student might be doing or how they might be engaging or feeling, and then
mm,
another kind of way to have like a diagnostic kind of situation there.
yeah.
So, well, I think that leads in then, Adriel, to our last question on this yearly exams episode. So, any final teacher tips or exam takeaways that teachers can make once they've kind of done the exam with their class and students?
Yeah. I will say, just even before your exam, again, I'm going to emphasize this: don't make life difficult for you when it comes to
Mm,
marking.
good
Really
tip.
think
Yep.
about your marking process.
Yep.
Think about, like, it's busy. Term 4 is generally when you're going to sit these yearly exams, and it's a busy term. It's very condensed. There's lots going on. If you're a senior teacher, not only are you finalizing year 12 with HSE at the beginning of the term, but then you're starting a new cohort generally if you are a senior
Yes.
teacher. So it's a lot of work.
Yes.
Just make sure you guys are looking after that. And like I said, don't make life difficult for you. I I know sometimes, like, I'll look at some of the assessments that I've marked previously, even in recent years, and I'm just like, oh man, it would have been so much easier if we just changed this or made it one text instead of 17, or a bit of hyperbole here, but like, that's exactly what I don't want, like, teachers to sort of feel like, oh, I have to mark this. So really consider the way you structure your examinations. Um, Very, very important. I think also breaking the stigma around what exams are. Like, exams are not something that
Yeah.
are there to sort of haunt your life. And you sort of just touched on this. There are some kids that will struggle and they'll feel like, their learning difficulties are exposed even further. I don't think that that's a bad thing, to be honest. Me personally, again, this is just my own thoughts. We live in an environment now where, you know, there is a lot more help around when it comes to people with learning difficulties, and we can only foster for help or provide help if we understand what is going on. And I think the exam then acts as a diagnostic tool there to really, it's not expose, but to really highlight,
Yeah.
the areas where you need to work with students, respective students,
Yeah.
where the students need additional support. So, if you are a student listening to this and you think, oh, but I struggle with exams. Everyone struggles with exams. I'm going to tell you right now,
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to
Mm-hmm.
life, and you've
Mm-hmm.
got 17 different things in both work and home life, and then also at work they say, well, you need to do X, Y, and Z under this time constraint, your KPIs or whatever it may be, you're in the furnace. So the exams there act as like just a little bit of a precursor taster as to what you'll face as an adult.
Yeah.
If you know you want to be someone who is successful in life, it's about working through the difficulties and challenges and looking at the best way you can approach this in your respective path that you have set out for you in front of you. So, yeah, I think breaking that stigma is very important. So, really encourage students that exams aren't this sort of big dooming gloom sort of thing. I mean, again, we're part of that old school way. I don't know about you, but for me, again, having that sort of thing where in year 10, if I didn't pass my school certificate, oh my goodness, I'm going to have to repeat. That used to actually motivate
Mhm.
me a lot more. I
Yeah.
don't know. I know people may argue with me and say, well, we have a different world here. Yeah, that's all well and true, but you'll still find your top end kids with those intrinsic motivators. They don't want to fail. And yeah, I think that's something that we can sort of work on a little bit, breaking that stigma around exams.
Yeah.
Use it as something that will
Yeah.
motivate you as opposed to something that's that daunting thing where it just cripples you into, you know, just that thought of failure.
I agree because I really feel, it's a societal thing too. We want to take away
Mm,
stress and anxiety from our students. Uh, but ultimately, if we're looking at the real world, it's not about removing it. It's about helping them find strategies and ways to cope. And, this is being said
mm,
from somebody who has had my own history with diagnosable anxiety and things like that. But removing the anxiety through, let's say, no exams, or just
mm,
take home, and that's all well and good. That has a time and place, but we must remember that in the real world, nobody takes away those stresses from you.
mm.
It's about coping and finding a way through those stresses. And a lot of
Right.
schools would have disability provisions and things like that. And so I think it's important that we forge ahead. And we've talked about so many ways that we can differentiate an exam and simplify it. I know that we've created exams before where it's not an entire response, it's a body paragraph,
Yeah.
for example, using the structure that your school, the platform that your school
Yeah.
uses, or just a 1 to 2 paragraph opening of a story. Or even we've had sections where we've put a rubric or a guide or a plan or a scaffold within the exam. So, and I think all those things are really valid and really useful, and will still
Yeah.
allow that to be a good exam. And you're using strategies to try and support the kids as opposed to not letting them engage with it at all. So I
Mm,
don't know. This is, I think, age or maybe our unique interpretation. I'll be really interested to hear what more, maybe some more new scheme teachers think. I
mm.
think you and I are a little bit of that old school where I think we were just towards the end of our schooling years, where we still were not heavily scaffolded. And I
Yeah.
honestly still cannot remember a time where any teacher was like, and this is how you write an intro, and this is
Yeah.
how you do a body. Like, I just don't. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's very different. I'm not saying, I mean, I personally love scaffolding. I love creating scaffolds. So I'm definitely not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just saying I think there's a lot of different schools of thought here. And
Yeah.
I have a child of my own, and I'm really big about not removing issues and pressures from him, but trying to think of ways to get him through that. And I know
Mm,
exams can be a very contentious issue. So it'll be interesting to see what our listeners think too.
Yeah, 100%. And like, I think I like what you've just mentioned there. I know we have interesting ways of thinking, and I think one of the key philosophies there is the fact that we're trying to find the root of an issue. We're not
Yeah.
putting a band-aid solution on something by just taking
Yes.
something away. And at
Absolutely.
the end of the day, it can be sometimes seen as harsh or tough or whatever it may be. But honestly, I would say this again, and again, might be my own personal thoughts here. We were part of that generation, and I don't think we've ended up that bad, to be honest. Um,
Mm.
Still work hard, and yes, there will be like a few bad apples in every single generation, and a few ways of thoughts and
Mhm.
thinking. But um,
Mhm.
these have been tried and tested sort of ways in which we know exams have been there throughout history. People will be sitting
Yeah.
tests for ages,
Yes.
millennia.
Yes.
It's only like in the last
Yeah.
few years where we sort of started to move away from this, and
Yeah.
I just think it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see. I'll do a little bit more study on this as well if I want to go into psychology and the psychology of exams and all that. There's plenty of literature out there, but these are just personal thoughts and observations as a teacher that has been in many environments for the last 10 or so years. So, yeah, these are my thoughts. They are not backed up by professors X, Y, and Z. They could be. I just have to find
Yeah,
them.
that's it. You don't have time, okay? You just got a year 12
Yeah,
through, you got HSC marking. Right now's
yeah,
not the time.
exactly
That's it.
right. Exactly.
That's it.
Goodness me.
Well, thank you everyone for listening. We hope this just has been a nice little chat leading up into term 4 for you now and likely exam period. Please engage with us on our socials. Let us know what you think. I don't mind hearing that I'm wrong. I'm a very open person like that. That's fine. So I really, really would love to hear, different thoughts, different opinions, because that's what makes, I think, teaching really great. And that's, I think, why we like age or being English teachers. We love to have a chat and have our differing perspectives on the table. And so, yeah, this is one good opportunity, I think, to have that. But
Mm,
please keep engaging. We are going to be releasing some new stage 6 HSC resources. So please keep an eye and ear out on our socials for where you can access that and some sneak peeks coming out with that as well.